Hello there, Josh Powers here with Quixel, and today I'm very excited to be able to show you a little more about the latest release of Quixel Mixer and how you can reconstruct this incredible looking material originally created by Victor Oman. So let's get started. Okay, so first off we're going to make a new project and I'll just name it Building Materials. Now I have a new folder for my mixes. I'm going to name this mix Brick Window, and my resolution will stay at 2048. And my workflow will remain specular. Now that we have a new scene, we're ready to start adding our shapes by creating a new paint layer. For the window cutout, I'm loading a pre-made height map image into a displacement channel. But first, I'll quickly show you how you can make a similar one in just a few layers inside Photoshop. First, start off by creating your window shape. Once you're happy with that, you can go into the Layer Style menu and activate the Stroke option. Using a fill type of gradient, make sure you match your gradient values to your background and shape values, which is white and a dark gray in this case. And then make sure your style is set to shape burst. Now you can adjust the look of the bevel with the size slider. Next, I used a simple gradient to give me a slightly smaller bevel on the vertical edges of the window, and then set the blending mode to lighten. As you can see, the bevel on the side isn't as wide as the one on the top, which matches Victor's material more closely. Lastly, for the windowsill, I use a simple gradient with the lighten blending style. And now we have a pretty solid base for our window. Now we'll simply load the height map into Mixer, and immediately we see some cool looking results. Let's crank up the strength a little bit and move on. Next, we're going to bump out that windowsill shape a little more by using the paint tools. So we'll go ahead and add a new paint layer and make sure to name it to help keep things organized. After we select a hard edge brush, we'll pick our displacement option. For hard surface materials, I almost always use the plateau option, which lets me clamp the height. In this case, I'm going to set the value to 5 and then start painting. It might look like I'm being sloppy with my brush strokes, but sometimes I find it's easier to overbrush and then erase than meticulously follow the shape I'm painting on. Now that the windowsill is finished, I'll hit the E key to bring up the eraser tool and then erase the overlapping brush strokes. You probably noticed some of the jagged lines along the edge of the displacement. Well, a nifty way to smooth that out is to add a solid layer above your displacement layer. We'll blend from above and wrap to base, then just crank up the remove base details to have a softening effect on the height information below it, effectively letting you control how tight the bevel is on your displacement. After trying out 4, I settle on 5 as a good value, giving me softened edges while retaining that hard surface look. Here I'm just playing with the strength of the height. Now I don't want the windowsill to come to such a sharp point, so I'm going to use another solid layer blending from above to almost act like a boolean, allowing me to flatten out that edge. Now it's time for the window frame. I'll once again use a hard brush with the plateau displacement option selected. I can dynamically scale my brush by holding down S and the middle mouse button. Sometimes I like to work with the normal rendering view so that I can more easily see the shapes and cuts without lighting. Once again, I overpaint my target and then erase, which helps me to have cleaner lines. I like to take my mixes as far as I can before I apply any of the Megascan surfaces to it. Since the layer stack works very similarly to Photoshop, planning ahead with your layer hierarchy can be advantageous to the process. Now I'll lower the plateau height so that I can cut out an area for the glass. For the curved top of the window, I'm using a hard round brush and utilizing the shift-click method to draw small incremental lines following the curve of the frame. I know I need the crossbars of the frame to be pretty evenly spaced, which isn't always easy to do by eye. So I load a tile surface from the library to act like a guide. I'm playing with the scale and offset to position it where I want. And then I reduce the opacity low enough that I can see the frame, but high enough to still see the lines. Now I can paint the center bar. Because the tiles are not a perfect match scale-wise, I adjust the offset to paint the other 2 vertical bars. And now I can paint the horizontal bars. As before, fixing overlap can be much faster than avoiding them in the first place. Since the brushes will conform to the displacement, toggling this feature off can be helpful at times when you need very accurate strokes. You can do this by hitting the D key or by pushing the icon next to the Render View dropdown. I decided the height of the window frame was a bit much, so I lowered the strength in the displacement channel. And then I adjust the Remove Base Details to add a bit more softness. Now it's time to add some Megascans. We'll first start off with this nice looking brick scan. I'll blend from above and make sure to wrap to base so that it follows the height information I've already made. And now I'm adjusting the offset so that the wider bricks are at the bottom of the plane. I'm adding a new paint layer so I can make a column on either side of the window. I use a large square brush and then pump up the value of the plateau displacement. The column is obviously too tall, so I'll quickly adjust the strength in the displacement channel. Because of the wraparound paint mode, my stroke was continued to the other side of the texture, ensuring that it will cleanly tile. However, I do want to try and line it up a bit more closely with the existing grout lines, so I'll shrink my brush down and make another stroke, and then check the tile by pressing T. Now I'll bring down the color to get a darker brownish red look. And in the original, the bottom row of bricks were bumped out, so I'm going to go ahead and use a slightly lower value than the columns and pull those out a bit. Alright, let's add the concrete brick trim around the window. Since these need to line up a specific way, I'll need to use 3 material layers to achieve it. As with the red brick, I'll blend from above and wrap to base. I'm starting with the top row of bricks, aligning them exactly how I want them. Then I'll do a quick color adjustment. And for now, I decided to turn off the red bricks underneath so that it's not quite as noisy to look at. After making a quick adjustment to the offset, I'm ready to mask. Once I add the layer mask to the material, I can start painting out the bricks that I don't need. After I'm finished, I duplicate the layer and clear the mask so that I can move on to the left side. However, my alignment depends on a drain pipe on the side of the window that's not currently there, so I need to make that first. Down near my other displacement layers, I create a new paint layer for the drain pipe. To get a nice smooth stroke, I grab the soft brush preset, drop the base curve to 0, then set spacing and flow down to 1. I then pump up the displacement value, and then make my stroke. With the drain pipe in place, I can now adjust the offset of my concrete bricks to line up perfectly with the drain. And now I'll paint the mask for this side. I'll repeat the same process for the other side, except I don't need to worry about the drain pipe. I'll simply use the left side as my reference and position the bricks accordingly before painting my mask. As you can see, the height of the smaller bricks is showing across everything, so I'll fix that by masking them out where necessary. I'm just using a square brush and moving around the edges first. In this particular instance, I don't need to be too precise with my masking, since the big bricks would have a rougher edge anyway. Once I get around all the edges, I can scale my brush up and quickly mask out the window area. I want to add some depth to the concrete bricks, so I add another paint layer and use the plateau displacement to pull them out. And now I'm fine-tuning the height. To help sell the brick depth, I am avoiding the grout lines and only painting the bricks themselves. However, due to the extremeness of this angle, I decided to use a soft brush to add some of that height to this particular grout line to avoid it feeling too unnatural. I decided to go ahead and remove the brick height information from the drain pipe. First I'll erase the bump out I had done with the columns. Then I'll mask out the bricks coming through the pipe itself. The grout lines are a bit too bright, so I'm going to go ahead and darken them down with a paint layer using only the diffuse channel. Using a soft brush, I make a single stroke before changing the layer blend to multiply and then lowering the opacity until I have the desired effect. Doing this across all the grout lines really helps blend them in with the rest of the texture. Now I'm ready to add a concrete texture for my windowsill. I choose a pretty clean surface to start with, but we'll add some damage to it in a little bit. And again, I'm using blend from above and wrap to base. I drag the layer beneath the others so I only have to mask out the drain pipe. Layer masks aren't just for painting out a surface. You can also paint them in, which is a really handy feature. Once again, adjusting the color to match the other materials. Okay, now it's time to add a metal surface for the window trim and the drain pipe. After playing with a few settings, the material is good to go. Now I'll add a solid layer for the glass panes. This is a case where I'm not wrapping to base, as I want to ensure that the glass pane does not have any of the other layer's height information affecting it. I'll make the diffuse pretty dark and then pump up the gloss for reflectivity. The pipe is feeling a little bland, so I want to add a few clamps or brackets just for a little visual breakup. I add a paint layer above the other displacement layers because I want the clamps to be fairly sharp, which would be difficult to do underneath some of the solid layers I have set up below. Okay, so dropping a bit lower in the stack, I add a new paint layer to create some height variation to the bricks. I'll set a displacement value, then paint over a few bricks before changing the value and repeating the process. Doing this will allow me to pull bricks out as well as push some in. This will add to the visual interest of the bricks and could be used to help sell the idea that the wall is a bit older. And to add even more character, I'm going to go ahead and add some pitting to the bricks. After selecting a concrete surface, I'm going to link it to the brick layer below. You can do this by alt-clicking on the layer, just like in Photoshop. I'm playing with the threshold to limit how much of the material shows through, and reducing the radius to make sure the fall off of the blend is a bit sharper. I also push up the high frequency slider to the max to really make the normals pop. Then I just need to adjust the diffuse to match the brick color a bit more closely. From there, it's all about tweaking the blend setting until I'm happy with the end result. Okay, now it's time to add a bit of wear and tear to the concrete areas. I'll start by adding a damaged concrete texture onto the windowsill, linking it like I just did with the bricks. Again, I'll play with the blend settings in the menu until I get the results I'm looking for. I'll adjust the color again, but in this case I want it to be slightly brighter than the surface underneath to add to that grungy, dirty look. Then I adjust the offset to tweak the crack placement. I use the exact same process for the concrete bricks above by adding the cracked concrete material and playing with the blend settings. Placing decals in Mixer is a breeze, so I'm going to go ahead and add some dead leaves to the windowsill. I'll link it to the windowsill layer, and then position it where I want it. Again, I darken the diffuse so that it doesn't stand out quite so much. Okay, the windows are looking too clean, so let's go ahead and grunge them up a little bit. For my grime, I use this sandy soil surface and then link it to the window layer. I all but remove the height data from the soil so that it doesn't have any real depth. Then I wrap to base and play with the threshold. I add a layer mask and start to paint out the centers of the glass, leaving the grime closer to the edges, which is where the dirt would naturally collect. Now that the masking is done, I adjust the diffuse and then lower the opacity to make the effect a bit more subtle. And lastly, I want to add a bit of wear on the larger bricks by sculpting around the edges. One of the things I love most about Mixer is the 2.5D sculpting. While the results are image-driven, when I'm making a brushstroke, it feels more like ZBrush or Modo to me, which is an incredibly powerful feature for a 2D-based program. Alright, now I think it's time to export. From the export menu, I can choose my output resolution, file type, and then which textures to include in the export. I can also pack the channels of the textures to fit my project's pipeline. In this case, I'm going to disable the AO and gloss exports, and then I'm going to rename the specular channel to mask. And since my spec map in this specific case isn't using any color, I'll leave specular R in the red channel, and then add my gloss map to the green channel, and my AO map to the blue channel. And now I'll export. And that about does it. In just a short time, we were able to create a great looking game ready material inside Quixel Mixer. The easy-to-use tools of Mixer, along with the ever-growing library of Megascan surfaces, is the perfect combination to allow artists to spend more time being creative and less time on technical details. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more Mixer tutorials coming soon.